Whoa.
SUVs. They're supposed to be the ultimate do-it-all vehicle. Rugged enough for the outdoors, comfortable enough for the family, and practical enough for everyday life. For decades, automakers have promised us that SUVs are the perfect combination of strength and convenience, a vehicle that gives you freedom, safety, and style. But here's the ugly truth. Not all SUVs live up to the hype. In fact, some were complete disasters right from the drawing board. Poor engineering, unsafe designs, bad timing, and marketing lies turned what should have been success stories into some of the most notorious failures in automotive history. Some of these SUVs flopped so hard they helped destroy entire car brands. Others earned reputations as unsafe, unreliable, or just plain embarrassing. And what's worse, people bought them in good faith, only to be left with vehicles that spent more time in repair shops than on the road. In this video, we're not just talking about SUVs that were unpopular. We're talking about SUVs that were built to fail. From botched engineering to doomed-from-the-start designs, these 17 SUVs stand as proof that when automakers cut corners, customers always pay the price. And here's the twist. Instead of starting at number 1, we're counting down from number 17. That way, every SUV on this list gets worse and worse until we reach the absolute king of failures. Stick around, because the SUV at number 1 might just shock you. So grab a seatbelt, one that hopefully works better than the ones in some of these SUVs, and let's dive into the countdown of the 17 SUVs that were truly built to fail. Number 17. Chevrolet Captiva. The Chevrolet Captiva was GM's global SUV experiment, but instead of being a worldwide success, it turned into a worldwide headache. On the surface, the Captiva looked like a sensible crossover. Compact size, 7 seats, and Chevy's badge promising reliability. But dig deeper, and you'll find it was basically a rebadged Daewoo, built cheaply to cut costs. That decision doomed it from the start. Owners complained about engine stalling, transmission failures, and endless electrical problems. In hot climates, overheating was common. In colder regions, rust set in fast. And unlike true Chevy SUVs built in the US, the Captiva didn't have strong aftermarket support, meaning repairs were expensive and parts were scarce. In India, Thailand, and even parts of Europe, the Captiva quickly gained a reputation as a garage queen, spending more time waiting for repairs than on the road. Consumer Reports ranked it near the very bottom of reliability charts, and online forums filled with angry owners who felt betrayed by the Chevy badge. Chevy wanted a global SUV to compete with Toyota's RAV4 and Honda's CR-V. Instead, it built one of the weakest entries in the class, one that disappeared from most markets quietly, without anyone shedding a tear. The Captiva wasn't just an SUV that failed, it was an SUV that was never truly competitive, doomed by bad engineering and cost-cutting. Number 16. Isuzu Axiom. Launched in the early 2000s, the Isuzu Axiom was supposed to be bold, futuristic, and innovative. And sure, it had a striking design for its time, but under that edgy body was a truck that was deeply flawed. The Axiom suffered from engine sludge problems that caused catastrophic failures under 60,000 miles. Imagine buying a brand new SUV and watching the engine seize up before its 3rd birthday. That was the nightmare reality for many Axiom owners. And the misery didn't stop there. Transmission failures, broken suspensions, and endless dashboard warning lights turned the Axiom into a reliability disaster. Isuzu had no strong dealer network in the US, which made repairs expensive and parts difficult to find. Reviewers blasted it for being harsh to drive, too stiff for comfort, too clunky for fun, and nowhere near the refinement of rivals like the Toyota Highlander or Honda Pilot. Customers walked away in droves, and within a few years, the Axiom was discontinued. But its damage lasted longer. The Axiom's flop accelerated Isuzu's collapse in the American market. By 2008, Isuzu pulled out of the US altogether, and the Axiom became a symbol of how a single failed SUV can drag down an entire brand. This SUV wasn't just unreliable, it was part of Isuzu's obituary. Number 15. Ford Explorer, 2002 to 2005. The Ford Explorer was once America's favorite SUV, a symbol of family adventure. But the early 2000s versions nearly destroyed that reputation forever. The biggest problem? Rollover accidents. Paired with defective Firestone tires, these Explorers had an alarming tendency to flip during sudden maneuvers. Hundreds of crashes and dozens of deaths were linked to this deadly combination. Ford faced lawsuits, government investigations, and a massive PR crisis. Even beyond the rollovers, the Explorer was plagued with transmission breakdowns, failing suspension parts, and cheap interiors that fell apart quickly. What was once the SUV family's trusted most suddenly became one of the most dangerous SUVs on the road. The fallout was enormous. Sales plummeted, Ford's reputation took a hit, and the Explorer name, once a badge of pride, was now whispered in the same breath as lawsuits and scandals. Rival SUVs like the Toyota 4Runner and Honda Pilot surged ahead as buyers fled Ford showrooms. While the Explorer eventually recovered with later generations, the early 2000 models are a dark stain in Ford's history. They didn't just fail, they turned one of the most successful SUVs in history into a national embarrassment. Number 14. Pontiac Aztek. Few vehicles in history are as infamous as the Pontiac Aztek. When it launched in 2001, GM promised a bold, adventurous SUV aimed at young, active families. What the world got instead was a design so bizarre it's still mocked today. The Aztek's awkward proportions, oversized cladding, and strange lines made it one of the ugliest SUVs ever built. But the problems went deeper than looks. It was built on a cheap minivan platform, which meant it drove clumsily, handled poorly, and never felt like a true SUV. Owners faced constant mechanical issues, from failing transmissions to faulty fuel sensors and weak suspension components. Reliability was abysmal, resale values tanked, and buyers abandoned it in droves. Sales were so bad that the Aztek didn't just flop, it helped kill Pontiac as a brand. By the late 2000s, Pontiac was gone from the GM lineup, and the Aztek was Exhibit A in how poor design and rushed engineering can destroy a company's credibility. Ironically, the Aztek later gained cult status thanks to Breaking Bad as Walter White's ride. But no TV cameo could erase the fact that in its own time, the Aztek was one of the biggest SUV failures ever built. Number 13. Jeep Compass, 2007 to 2010. When Jeep announced the Compass, fans expected a smaller SUV with real off-road grit. What they got was a cheaply built crossover that felt nothing like a Jeep. The first-generation Compass was slammed for its plastic-heavy interior, underpowered engines, and noisy CVT transmission. Off-road? Forget it. Despite wearing the Jeep badge, it struggled on rough trails, and couldn't compete with rivals like the Subaru Forester. Reliability was just as bad. Owners reported engine stalling, suspension breakdowns, and endless electrical failures. Consumer Reports placed it near the bottom of compact SUV rankings year after year. Jeep enthusiasts hated it, calling it a disgrace to the brand. Instead of rugged capability, the Compass delivered mediocrity wrapped in Jeep marketing. Sales were poor, reviews were brutal, and Jeep was forced to overhaul it in later years just to salvage the nameplate. The early Compass proved that slapping a legendary badge on a weak SUV isn't enough. If anything, it made Jeep look worse. Number 12. Suzuki XL7, 2007 to 2009. The Suzuki XL7 was Suzuki's shot at the mid-size SUV market, but it turned into one of the nails in the coffin for Suzuki's U.S. presence. Co-developed with GM, the XL7 was essentially a Chevy Equinox underneath, which meant it inherited all of GM's weaknesses. Owners faced timing chain failures, transmission breakdowns, and constant electrical problems. Even relatively new XL7s became money pits, costing thousands in repairs. The interior was dated and cheap, fuel economy was disappointing, and it offered none of the refinement of rivals like the Toyota Highlander or Honda Pilot. Worse still, Suzuki's shrinking dealer network made it nearly impossible to find parts or reliable service. Customers abandoned the brand, and by 2012, Suzuki pulled out of the US completely. The XL7 wasn't the only reason, but it was one of the most visible failures that dragged Suzuki down. Number 11. Lincoln Aviator, 2003 to 2005. The Lincoln Aviator should have been an American luxury SUV success. Instead, it turned into one of Lincoln's most embarrassing failures. Why? Because underneath its fancy chrome grille and leather interior, the Aviator was really just a Ford Explorer. And that meant it inherited all of the Explorer's notorious early 2000s problems: rollover risks, transmission failures, and cheap build quality. For a vehicle marketed as a luxury alternative to Lexus and Acura, this was unforgivable. Buyers paying luxury prices expected refinement and reliability, two things the Aviator couldn't deliver. Reviews slammed it for harsh handling, poor safety scores, and questionable reliability. Consumer Reports consistently ranked it among the least reliable luxury SUVs of its era. It sold poorly, damaged Lincoln's reputation, and was discontinued after just 2 years. When people look back at Lincoln's struggles in the 2000s, the Aviator is a prime example of how not to build a luxury SUV. Number 10. Mitsubishi Endeavor, 2004 to 2008. The Mitsubishi Endeavor was supposed to mark Mitsubishi's big comeback in America. Instead, it highlighted exactly why the brand was struggling. On the surface, the Endeavor looked modern, but under the hood it was already outdated. Its V6 engine was thirsty, underpowered, and unrefined. The ride was harsh, handling was sloppy, and the interior plastics felt cheap even by mid-2000 standards. Reliability issues made things worse. Owners faced AC compressor failures, faulty transmissions, and electrical breakdowns. Repairs were expensive, resale values were terrible, and word of mouth killed it. Reviewers criticized the Endeavor for having no clear identity. It wasn't rugged enough for off-road fans, nor comfortable or refined enough for families. In a crowded SUV market, it simply didn't stand out. Sales collapsed within a few years, and Mitsubishi quietly pulled it from the lineup. Today, the Endeavor is remembered as one of the SUVs that nearly sank Mitsubishi's U.S. operations entirely. Number 9. Hyundai Veracruz, 2007 to 2012. The Hyundai Veracruz was Hyundai's first attempt at a full-size three-row SUV, meant to compete with Toyota and Honda. On paper, it looked impressive. Smooth V6 power, plenty of interior space, and lots of features for the price. But reality told a very different story. The Veracruz suffered from constant oil leaks, electrical glitches, and premature engine failures. Owners reported repeated trips to dealerships for major issues, sometimes within the first few years of ownership. Reviewers at the time called it bland and forgettable. It didn't have the refinement of the Toyota Highlander or the personality of the Honda Pilot. Combine that with its reliability problems, and it never had a chance. Hyundai discontinued the Veracruz quietly, replacing it with the Santa Fe XL. Today, almost no one remembers it except for frustrated owners who spent thousands keeping theirs alive. Number 8. Chevrolet Trailblazer, 2002 to 2009. The Chevrolet Trailblazer was supposed to be GM's answer to the Ford Explorer. Instead, it became one of the most problem-prone SUVs of the 2000s. Its inline-six engine, while powerful, was notorious for head gasket failures, timing chain issues, and electrical gremlins. Owners constantly complained about dashboards lighting up with warning lights that no mechanic could fully resolve. Transmission breakdowns were common, often before 100,000 miles. Suspension components wore out quickly, giving the Trailblazer a sloppy, unstable ride. And fuel economy was atrocious, making it an expensive SUV to own even when it was running. Consumer Reports ranked it among the least reliable SUVs year after year, and sales plummeted. By 2009, Chevy retired the nameplate entirely. The Trailblazer was later revived as a crossover, but for those who remember the original, it will always be a symbol of GM's darkest SUV years. Number 7. Kia Borrego, 2009 to 2011. The Kia Borrego might be one of the strangest failures on this list. Unlike some others, it wasn't plagued by mechanical disasters. Instead, it was simply launched at the worst possible time. Arriving in the U.S. during the 2008 financial crisis, when gas prices were skyrocketing, the Borrego offered a thirsty V8 engine and body-on-frame construction. Buyers wanted smaller, more fuel-efficient crossovers, not a hulking, full-size SUV from a brand not known for trucks. The Borrego's bland styling didn't help. Reviewers called it forgettable, and consumers ignored it entirely. Sales were so bad that Kia pulled it from the U.S. after just 2 years. Ironically, the Borrego was actually solidly built. In another time, it might have found success. But timing matters, and in this case, Kia's full-size SUV was doomed before it even arrived. Number 6. Oldsmobile Bravada, 1991 to 2004. The Oldsmobile Bravada was Oldsmobile's attempt to enter the luxury SUV market, but it was a disaster that highlighted everything wrong with GM in the 1990s. Underneath the fancy trim, the Bravada was just a Chevy Blazer with extra chrome. It shared the Blazer's notorious reliability issues: weak transmissions, endless electrical faults, and poor build quality. Owners complained about constant stalling problems, failing ABS systems, and high repair bills. And at a higher price than the Blazer, the Bravada felt like a rip-off. Sales were dismal, and the Bravada did nothing to save Oldsmobile from its decline. When Oldsmobile was shut down in 2004, the Bravada went with it, barely a footnote in history. This SUV wasn't just a failure on its own, it was part of the reason an entire brand died. Number 5. Dodge Nitro, 2007 to 2012. The Dodge Nitro looked bold and aggressive with its boxy design and flared fenders. Unfortunately, everything else about it was a disaster. Its engines were underpowered and thirsty, the transmissions clunky, and the suspension stiff to the point of discomfort. Reviewers blasted it for being noisy, crude, and cheap inside. Consumer Reports famously called it one of the worst vehicles we've ever tested. Owners agreed, reporting endless problems with electronics, brakes, and interior components falling apart. The Nitro was supposed to compete with vehicles like the Ford Escape and Toyota RAV4, but it never stood a chance. Buyers fled Dodge showrooms, and by 2012, the Nitro was gone. Today, it's remembered mostly as a punchline, a failed attempt at making a cool SUV that turned out to be one of the worst ever built. Number 4. Mercury Mountaineer, 1997 to 2010. The Mercury Mountaineer was meant to be a classier version of the Ford Explorer. Instead, it inherited all of the Explorer's notorious flaws and added a few of its own. Like the Explorer, it became infamous for rollover accidents, especially in the early 2000s. Add to that transmission breakdowns, suspension issues, and constant electrical problems, and you had a so-called luxury SUV that was anything but luxurious. The Mountaineer never had its own identity. It wasn't different enough from the Explorer to justify its higher price. Buyers ignored it, sales collapsed, and when Mercury as a brand was shut down in 2010, the Mountaineer disappeared with it. It wasn't just built to fail, it was built as an afterthought. Number 3. Cadillac Escalade EXT, 2002 to 2013. The Cadillac Escalade EXT was Cadillac's strange attempt to merge a luxury SUV with a pickup truck. What buyers got instead was one of the most impractical and unreliable vehicles Cadillac ever sold. Based on the Chevy Avalanche, the EXT inherited its awkward proportions but added Cadillac's sky-high price tag. The result? A vehicle with all the downsides of an SUV and all the downsides of a truck. Reliability was atrocious. Owners faced air suspension failures, endless electrical faults, and failing transmissions. Repairs were eye-wateringly expensive, often costing thousands. Sales were weak from the beginning, and by 2013, Cadillac killed the EXT quietly. Today, it's remembered as one of GM's most pointless experiments. The EXT wasn't just a failure, it was a case study in how trying to do too much can result in a vehicle that does nothing well. Number 2. Chrysler Aspen, 2007 to 2009. The Chrysler Aspen was Chrysler's attempt to cash in on the luxury SUV boom. Unfortunately, it was nothing more than a rebranded Dodge Durango with more chrome. Like the Durango, the Aspen was plagued with engine problems, suspension failures, and poor fuel economy. Add to that the fact that Chrysler launched it right in the middle of the 2008 financial crisis, when nobody wanted a gas-guzzling SUV, and the Aspen never had a chance. Sales were so bad that Chrysler killed it after just 2 years. By then, Chrysler itself was on the verge of collapse, and the Aspen became one of the most short-lived luxury SUVs ever sold. It wasn't just a flop, it was a sign of Chrysler's desperation. Number 1. Hummer H2, 2003 to 2009. At the top of our list, the SUV most famously built to fail, the Hummer H2. Marketed as the ultimate tough guy SUV, the H2 was really just a Chevy Tahoe in disguise. Bloated, inefficient, and impractical. Weighing over 6,000 pounds, it delivered single-digit fuel economy. At a time when gas prices were skyrocketing, the H2 became the poster child for wastefulness and excess. Handling was terrible, braking distances were dangerously long, and reliability was poor. Owners reported air suspension failures, electrical meltdowns, and transmission issues that cost thousands to fix. Consumer Reports gave it some of the lowest ratings ever for an SUV, calling it one of the worst they had tested. The public soon turned on it, mocking the H2 as a symbol of greed and poor taste. By 2009, GM killed the Hummer brand altogether. The H2 wasn't just an SUV that failed, it was the SUV that defined failure. A vehicle remembered more as a cultural joke than a capable machine. So there you have it, 17 SUVs that were built to fail. From the ugly Pontiac Aztek to the unreliable Trailblazer, from luxury pretenders like the Lincoln Aviator to gas-guzzling disasters like the Hummer H2, these vehicles all prove one thing. When automakers get it wrong, they get it very wrong. Some failed because of bad design, some because of poor timing, some because they were just cheaply made, and a few, like the Explorer and Mountaineer, failed because they put people's safety at risk. The SUV market is brutal. Consumers expect reliability, safety, and value. And when a vehicle doesn't deliver, buyers move on quickly. That's why so many of the SUVs on this list disappeared quietly, their names buried in history books as reminders of failure. But for car enthusiasts, these flops are fascinating. They show us how even the biggest automakers can make mistakes, and how a single bad SUV can drag down an entire brand. So the next time you see one of these rolling relics on the road, remember, you're looking at a piece of automotive history, a reminder that not every SUV was built to succeed. Which SUV on this list do you think was the worst failure of all time? Was it the Aztek, the H2, or maybe a forgotten flop like the Suzuki XL7? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the cars, trucks, and SUVs that shaped history, for better and for worse. Because in the auto world, some vehicles make legends, and others, like these 17, are remembered only because they were built to fail.